I don't know if I sound different, but I sound different in my head. My voice is a little scratchy this morning, so bear with me if I'm questionable. I made the call Friday that I was not leading singing today, and so fortunately being blessed with an enormous number of really talented song leaders here, that was taken care of in no time at all. So that was, it is truly a blessing here. We have so many people who are talented in so many ways and just giving of themselves. So a wonderful thing. Speaking of which, I want to thank Charlie for covering for me last week. I was out of town. Appreciate his filling in. As we move forward, we're into the home stretch, as it were, of the class. These last 4 lessons are kind of profiles, looking at specific individuals in the Bible that manifest some element of encouragement. I say individuals, but we're talking about Jesus and God in the last 2 weeks, so there's your ultimate standard and your ultimate example. But today we're going to talk about Nehemiah and the courage to build. If you've been around this congregation or I would suspect the church in general over 20 years or so, there's no telling how many lessons you've heard on Nehemiah and building. This one takes a little bit of a different tack to it, and so take all of those things that you've learned over the years and synthesize them into the discussion today, because the things that we've learned about Nehemiah over that period of time are instructive to this idea of being an encourager. And so that's what we're going to look for this week. In terms of the prayer that we've been looking at every week, the key phrase this week is, today, Lord, I will help someone to build by nudging her or him one step closer to her dreams. And so that is our goal as far as this week, the thing that we're going to encourage and push ourselves to do. Did Charlie give homework? Did you give homework Sunday? Encourage everybody. Oh, well, you cheated. You didn't take it out of the book. Okay, so Charlie gave homework. I hope you all did it. I believe that when Charlie gives it to you, you more likely do it than when I give it to you. So, but I'll have homework for you at the end of this lesson. I like this quote actually from our author that's in the book. He said, "We must begin practicing the proven principles of encouragement in our homes, churches, neighborhoods, and businesses. It must be every day and not just Sunday." And we've kind of had that as our theme all through the quarter. We've tried every week to talk about how do I practically apply this? How do I take this skill that we're looking at and make it fit me and give me something to go do with it? But as we enter these last 4 lessons, this is really section 3 of this book that was written. This is where, according to the author, we are moving into practical application. We are taking all of these tools that we've looked at, all of these attitudes that we've developed, and we're trying to really see that in some Bible characters or some people and certainly our Lord, and now say, let's take that and make it fit every day in our lives. So I like that start. When we moved into this lesson has 3 slightly different focuses from the way that our prior lessons, the first 8 that we've looked at, have been. Anybody want to toss out something that you noticed that's different about what this focus was? I have 3, but you might have more. Yes, ma'am.
It's not focusing on how to do it. It's saying get out there and to do it.
Okay. Carolyn says it's not focusing on how to do it, it's getting out there and actually doing it. And I think that's a fair application. What else? I'll give you my three, and then you can tell me whether you have others. One of them is, it is more of a character study. I mean, we are really, instead of looking at some trait and saying the hands of an encourager or the ears of an encourager, we're looking at a man in Scripture, and we're looking at how he actually applied these principles. And so it is a case study. Secondly, it's looking at, it's a different look at who is being encouraged. This is talking about a group of people and not individuals. If you think back to the lessons that we have had, they have been about us becoming encouragers, and it's kind of been a notion of, let me go encourage that person. You know, kind of a one-on-one almost sort of thing. I don't know that that was intentionally the case, but that's kind of how I have seen that going. You know, I want to be looking for that person that seems like they're kind of stepping back from the group, and I want to draw them in. I want to make them feel part of the group, that kind of thing. But here what we're talking about is an entire group that needs to be encouraged, and one man taking that task on. And then third, it looks at the obstacles that an encourager faces in more detail. And there are some of these that I would say are probably unique to a group setting. You know, when you think about the things that Nehemiah faces in his story, you know, people are accusing him of trying to overthrow the government. People are accusing him, people are trying to just badmouth him and create distrust of him across the entire organization. Usually if you're trying to reach out to one person and build them up, you're probably not going to face that. Maybe you will. But in a bigger group setting, you know, people are kind of, you know, you're going to face those people that kind of give you the side eye and say, why are you doing this? What's in it for you? You know, why are you trying to build this group up? Is it for some, you know, purpose that you have that you're trying to benefit from? So those are all the things that I saw that were different about this particular lesson. And I kind of want to ask the question, what are some of the examples for us today of our needs for group encouragement? What groups do we need to encourage? Here's a crazy idea. How about the congregation, right? Let's just start with that one, right? How about one another as brothers and sisters as a group? Okay, for sure that's one of them. What are some other group things? Yes, sir?
Converts.
New converts. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole category in and of itself, right? And they need some very, very special attention. I can remember, I was not a new convert, but I had kind of gotten through college more or less as a new convert, and when I finally landed at a place I was going to be at for a while, they kind of put me in with a bunch of people who were relatively new Christians, and we kind of started at the basics and really grounded me. And I thought, and it was wonderful. It made a difference in how I looked at everything. New converts is a good one. Any other ones? Yes, ma'am. New members, absolutely. You know, not just new converts, but people who come, you know, from out of town or you know, just come from, you know, even other congregations in the area for various reasons. Think about the groups that we have here at Jackson Heights. We have a ton of them, right? We have Sisters Without Misters, right? We have Salt Shakers. We have, you know, we have all of these groups that are doing things. And kind of think back to what started those groups How did they get going, right? And how are they kind of able to maintain that momentum that's going on? And as you think about those things, see if you can't see pieces of Nehemiah's story in where those things came from. Because I think what you're going to see is a lot of those things literally are following the same flow that we're going to look at in this lesson. And you can see that even today, even among ourselves, there are groups that are operating or got started kind of following this idea of, hey, we need to go do this. Here's an idea, and it grew and developed and got motivated. But you know what? Continuing to encourage those groups is really important. So think about that stuff. Yes, sir.
Of course, there's groups without names. You know, there's young families. There's those that have common illness. But in anything with groups, you know, people join clubs or in organizations like a Rotary Club, or they just become part of a common group because they're wanting to be part of something to help encourage them and possibly encourage others. But there's something they have in common and a common goal.
Yeah, Tim said the thing about groups is that they tend to have something in common. He used, I love this phrase, groups without names, right? He was talking about, you know, young families or, you know, other groups of people who share, you know, sadly a common illness, right? But he talked about people joining clubs of common interest to be encouraged. And those are all areas here where we can kind of look at, you know, we can kind of look at the origin story of that group and kind of follow it through the way Nehemiah's, you know, situation evolves here. And we can apply it today. And I think that's where, you know, sometimes you study Nehemiah and you think, this is an incredibly great story and it's incredibly cool history. What's it got to do with me? I'm not going to go rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, right? Well, no, but the principles, and what I really liked about this lesson was this idea that, you know, there is kind of a flow to what happened with Nehemiah. And it started with one thing and it went through these other phases. And the other piece of this I'll say is, you know, that might be something that needs to happen here. You might be a person with an idea, you know, that we need to do this. And you know, looking at what Nehemiah did and how this actually came about might be helpful to you in kind of pursuing that idea. Yes, sir.
You know, a lot of time with groups, what happens is somebody sees a need and they have a discussion about this would be good if we had this group. But what happens a lot of times is there's not a Nehemiah that takes a hold of that and leads it and keeps it going. Sometimes the elders we have say, well, you know, it'd be good to have this. Okay, well, who's going to be in charge of it? And who's going to keep it going and keep encouraging people to be participating in it? I think that's what happens sometimes. Groups kind of fall away because, well, I know we need it, but I really don't want to be Nehemiah. I don't want to be part of it. I want somebody else to do it.
I'd like to give you the mic and just let you kind of, yeah. Charlie hit. I mean, Charlie's completely spot on, and I'm going to do a bad job of summarizing, but it was really good. Charlie's saying, you know, a lot of times groups come because somebody says we need this. There is a gap here, but they kind of fall away because nobody grabs it and leads it and drives it all the way to, you know, to completion or to get it rolling and kind of keep it rolling. And Charlie said, you know, even as elders, right? They say, hey, you know what would be really good is if we could do this. But it's a really good idea. But it's only an idea until somebody grabs it and leads it and runs with it and develops it and drives it. And that's exactly the point. You know, and we're going to 100% see that in Nehemiah. Because you look at Nehemiah and we talk about the power of an articulated dream, right? The whole excitement at the beginning of Nehemiah is we get to go back. We get to go back home. You know, do you remember how cool Jerusalem was? Let's all go back to Jerusalem. And you get to Jerusalem and you're like, uh-oh. It's been 70 years. Guess what? It's a mess. All the walls are torn down. All the gates are burned. Temples in ruins. It's a mess. And so, you know, over a couple of decades, we get some things going. God has to send some prophets to kind of nudge people, and we get the temple built, and that's great. But then we're kind of out of energy. And we're back to just kind of keeping your head above water, right? And kind of dealing with that. And, you know, so as Nehemiah is developing his particular dream, which is to restore the walls, you know, rebuild Jerusalem, not just the temple, right? What he's hearing is all the reports coming back from Jerusalem that say, man, it's unpleasant here. You know, it's famine and it's, you know, high taxes and it's hard to be. And so, you know, Nehemiah's kind of sitting back and going, boy, somebody ought to do something about Jerusalem. Somebody should really do something about that. And, you know, isn't that, I mean, are we not like that? Somebody ought to do something about that. I'm not going to do nothing about it, but somebody should do something about that, right? And until somebody actually is me, it may not happen. Yes, sir.
Those that came before Nehemiah were takers, but Nehemiah was a giver.
Yeah, Lee said the people who came before Nehemiah were takers, and Nehemiah was a giver. Nehemiah had the vision, and he was trying to deliver something. And I think that is a pretty decent way of kind of summarizing that time, right? So we think about what is Nehemiah up against, you know, as he's starting to really think about what is it that we need, and what's in his head is like, you know what I really want is I want reports coming back to me that say, hey, we're rolling. We're putting the walls up. We're doing this. He wants to be like, yeah, go team. And what he's kind of getting is, nah, it's not working, you know. And so Nehemiah sees a need, right? And he sees the need to rally around this goal or this dream as a team. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff in this chapter about nurturing the dream like you nurture a child. And it talks about the power of teamwork. And in a group setting, those are really important things. When we talk about teamwork, you know, all the sports cliches come in. You know, you could spend the rest of the class talking about the importance of teamwork. But what you have to have is a common vision, and you've got to be able to keep people directed back to that vision, right? You have to keep people's focus on the one thing that we're all working to achieve. There are going to be other things that come up. We will deal with them, but we have this goal and we're working towards it. And Nehemiah sees that's what we're lacking, you know, because really all everybody's trying to do is keep their head above water in Jerusalem right now. They're just trying to get through every day. And, you know, I think we all go through times like that. I've been through times like that where it's an exhausting time. You come home and you're just shot. And all you accomplished today was you kept your head above water, right? And you don't have any energy for anything else. And that's, you know, that's what they're facing here. You know, the quote that I threw in here for the teamwork idea is successful groups stress teamwork over individuality, right? We may have people who are really good at different things, but, you know, we all have to work together towards this common thing. Your individual, you know, specialness may not stand out in this, you know, this common goal that we're working towards. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be a participant. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be a part of it. And because you're a part of it, you're helping the team achieve the goal. You know, think about evangelism as an example of this, right? You know, how are we going to evangelize all of Middle Tennessee? How are we going to do it? Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to have Isaac and Dennis and David and Joe. You guys go. Y'all go do that. See you later. Right? That is not going to get it done. Right? But those are our 4 best evangelizers. Yeah. I'm not very good at that. Could you maybe do 1? Right? It's not always taking just the very best that we have and sending them out there. Sometimes it is. But for some common causes, for some causes that are for the group, we need everybody with every level of skill to at least take a crack at it. You know, if we're going to evangelize Middle Tennessee, every one of us has to talk to somebody. You know, and it may be, you know, in retrospect, you may say, that was a really pitiful attempt I did. But I tried, right? I was part of the team trying to do this, right? What was it? You know, Rufus used to say this, and the elders still talk about this, right? 3 invitations every week, right? 3 invitations every week, right? They didn't say, you 4, 3 invitations every week. They said, all of you. 3 invitations every week, right? So it's that kind of idea. It's rallying around a concept. Even though your individual skill set may not be just completely, this is the thing I do best, you still are working towards that common thing. That fit? Make sense? Okay. This is where it gets realistic. And this is where I get back to Charlie's comment, right? Got really good ideas. Somebody ought to do that. It'd be a really good thing. But until you actually step up and say, I guess nobody else is going to do it if I don't do it, and say, I will do it, that's when the dream has a chance to be achieved. Somebody steps up and says, I'm going to do this. Now, for Nehemiah, this happens in front of the king. So Nehemiah basically lays it all on the line. Do kings generally want sad, kind of bummed out people hanging around them? Or do they want people who are great? It's a great day in the kingdom. Oh, king, live forever. That's what they want, right? And so, but Nehemiah's heart is so heavy about what's going on in Jerusalem, he kind of isn't the happy-go-lucky guy he usually is. And so he's handing the king his drink, and the king looks at him and he says, what is the matter with you? Which is not necessarily a good thing, for your livelihood, when the king sees that, because that is not what he wants. But he asks. So now Nehemiah might just say, oh, king, I was just sick, and it's all good. Don't mind. I'll be fine tomorrow. I'll be fine. But Nehemiah steps out, right? And he says, I can't help it. These people in Jerusalem, the house of my father is in ruins. I can't hide it any longer. He has stepped out and said, he's made his commitment. He is living a good life in Shushan. He's got a good job. He's right there with the king, handing him his drinks. And now he's not only kind of risking his life, but certainly if he gets what he's about to ask for, he's going to take a big step down. He's going to take what we would call a major pay cut, right? And he says, I want to go, send me to Jerusalem and let me rebuild it, right? So he has stepped out. He's willing to sacrifice his cushy life. He's saying, I'm the one that can do it. And he's saying, I believe God is going to be with me on this. I know that's true because before he answers the king, he says, I prayed, and then I answered, right? Got to be one of the shortest prayers in recorded history because I don't think the king is sitting around waiting for him to give him an answer when he said what's wrong. So it was a fast prayer, but, he was invoking, God's help in this endeavor. When Charlie says the elders have a lot of good ideas, but they need somebody to lead them, who's going to lead them? Well, we've seen it. We've seen, we talked about them, right? Sisters without misters, salt shakers. We've seen people step up and say, I'll take that on. I'll take that role. Who's going to step up with the next idea? It's going to be one of us. We can all hope, right? So there are things that we can do, but it's going to cost you. Now, you may not have to basically, I like the analogy, you may not have to move to a third world country and rebuild a city in ruins, right? But when you take on a challenge of trying to turn a dream into reality, particularly in work for the Lord, it is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you maybe some free time. It's going to cost you, some things that you would rather do, but you see the value of this, and so you put those things to the side for a while. There's going to be a sacrifice involved, and that's okay. But you got to be ready for that when the opportunity comes. Comments, thoughts on that before we move on? Dick.
Arrived, he looked at what was going on, the walls were down, the temple's down, but everybody's got plenty of time to build their houses, and that's what they're working on. They're not worried about the city, they're not worried about what's important. And I think sometimes that is the problem, it's our priorities, it's what we want to do, and like you said, we may not want to do encouraging others or groups. We may not even want to belong to that group because it takes some of our time, and so we don't want to do it. But Nehemiah did an attitude adjustment. He brought in Ezra to read the law, and the law said, hey, what God wants you to do is important.
Yeah, Dick said, we get distracted doing other things, right? I mean, what Nehemiah saw was that nobody's working on the walls, but everybody had working on their own house. That was okay, right? And there was some of that, right? And there's, again, kind of a lack of focus. If there's no one driving a vision, if there's no one that's making the commitment to step out front and say, we're going this way, let's go, without that, everyone does what it seems like a good idea to them. I'm going to work on my woodworking skills, right? I'm going to fix up my house. I'm going to extend my living room an extra 10 feet or whatever, right? Whatever seems good to me, because there's not a common vision driving us towards something, right? It's the, at work, when I get really frustrated with my leadership, which I should not do, but I'm getting older, and it is what it is. But I used to call it the, where's our we're going to the moon moment, right? There was a moment in the Kennedy administration where he says, we're going to the moon, right? And everybody rallied around that. We are going to the moon. And within the decade, we're going to go. And we did. And I talked to people at NISA. I said, we really got to get, we got to get our IT systems doing this. Well, why don't we? Well, it'd be really hard. We have a lot of this and we have a lot of that stuff and whatever. I said, well, what we need is our VP to say we're going to the moon, right? You got 5 years to get all this over here, make it happen, or there will be consequences, right? We're going to the moon, right? Same thing with these dreams, right? What was Nehemiah's vision? We're going to rebuild Jerusalem. We're going to the moon. When Nehemiah gets there, we're going to talk about how he approaches it next, but he's already made the decision. We're going to the moon. We're rebuilding Jerusalem. And everybody is going to get on board. So planning and then presentation. I love this piece, and the book talks about it too. When Nehemiah gets there, he doesn't come marching into the town, walk right up the podium and say, all right, everybody, here's what we're going to do. He wanders around the city for a couple of days. He kind of looks at it, kind of sees where we are, what's going on, what are people working on, what's the situation around us. And he kind of thinks about it for a couple of days, and then he goes up to the podium because now he's got a plan. You know, it's one thing, you know, I debated in high school and college. I've got a willing mouth to talk a lot. I can speak fairly persuasively. But if there's no substance, if there's no depth to that, then it's a momentary, you know, yeah, let's go do that, and then it all kind of falls apart, right? So you got to have something with some meat to it, kind of a plan. You know, we're going to the moon. How are you going to do it? I don't know, it just seemed like the right thing to say at the time. Well, no. Engineers, I need you to do this. I need a rocket that can get me there. I need an idea of what do we put people in? You know, I need this, I need this, I need this. Now, he had a bunch of advisors to do it. Nehemiah maybe less so, but but the point being is, you know, kind of thought it through, kind of figured out what does this look like, and then kind of began to execute it. Are you starting to see some of those patterns for what we do with groups and things like here in the congregation to what Nehemiah is up against, right? And the things that we want to do to grow and expand the Lord's church. And you know, we don't just say we're going to do it and then start. We think it through, and we lay that plan. And then here's the next part. So I'm going to skip over Nehemiah rallying the troops, because you know that he does, right? We've got people building the walls. We got people excited. But, you know, this is the other piece of any project like that. You have to keep the ball rolling once you get it started. You know, part of the encourager role evolves when you're trying to turn a dream into something that is real. You have to kind of rally the troops. You kind of got to get the plan together. You get people started. But when you're encouraging a group, you know that things are going to come up. And when they come up, you don't act surprised, and you don't say, well, I got it going, so y'all sort that out. I'm going to go back over here, join my bowling team. You know, you got to know they're coming, and then you've got to have a kind of think through, okay, how am I going to get this problem solved and not lose momentum and keep people moving in the right direction? And we think about things that we have to overcome. Criticism, right? Again, when I'm trying to encourage someone one-on-one, if I'm trying to encourage Dick, right? Most of you may never even see that interaction. You know, much less, you know, kind of criticize how I'm trying to do that, you know. But when you're trying to drive a group into a certain direction, the critics are everywhere, right? They're like, this is not going to work. Why are you organizing things like that? I think we should step back and try to do it a different way, right? There's a lot of criticism, and you have to expect that that's going to happen. And you have to do two things. Three, actually. One, you have to say, hey, is that criticism legit? Maybe I should kind of course correct and try to move forward. Two, you got to stay on task, right? I can take criticism, I can make changes to the course. That doesn't mean I got to stop everything. We're going to keep moving. And then the third thing is I can't let it distract me from my leadership execution. Not everything I do is going to be perfect. I have to expect that I'm going to hear criticism of stuff that goes on, And if I just kind of shrink away the first time that happens, the ball will stop and we will not move forward. So there's a lot of work even after you get something going. Hardship. You know, yes, people in Nehemiah's time had time to work on their houses and stuff like that, and he kind of repurposed them, but there were real problems in Jerusalem. There was famine. There were high taxes. You know, they had to be able to do something other than build the wall all day long and nothing else, because they still had to eat. You know, and nobody was paying them to build the wall. So, you know, they had to do more. And Nehemiah had to understand that. And he had to understand that people have limits. They can't all do this all the time, every day. You know, and so you have to look at the people and say, what is reasonable for me to expect of that person? And, you know, maybe I need to let them peel out for a little bit to take care of something and then come back. You know, run-of-the-mill discouragement, right? I got to believe that for the first several days, at least, of rebuilding the wall, when I get up in the morning and I go to my little part of the wall, it doesn't look any different than it did yesterday. I worked all day on this. It looks just the same as it looked yesterday. And, you know, after a while, that just starts to wear on you. Until you start seeing progress and you got something to get excited about, you know, people are going to get down on the project. Distraction, right? You know, people who don't want you to accomplish what you're doing will try to distract you. They'll distract you in any way that they can. Hey, we got another project over here. Let's go work on this instead. Or, you know, Doug, he's just doing this for his own personal gain. He's using you guys as lackeys to build his empire, right? I mean, they're going to do whatever they can do to distract you from what it is that we're trying to do. And then the last thing, if that doesn't work, is they'll try to scare you. You know, if you do this, people are going to think you're strange. You're a very strange person. You guys are a bunch of nuts. Is this a cult that y'all are part of? What is this? You really do want to convert everybody in Middle Tennessee to your church? Wow, y'all are strange people. You should stay away from that. Things could happen to you because you're strange people. You know, we may have to do some things about you guys, right? They'll just try to scare you. And that's all problem solving, right? It's like, how am I going to address each one of these things that kind of gets thrown at me? Nehemiah got all of these, right? Nehemiah got told that people are coming to kill you now. You better run over to the temple and hide. Because if you don't, they're going to kill you. And it was his priest that was telling him that. Now, Nehemiah had already decided, live or die, I'm doing this job. So I'm not going, right? So, you know, all of these things, you see it in the story of Nehemiah. You may not see it in this lens of group encouragement. But what would people have thought if Nehemiah ran and hid in the temple while they're out there working on the wall? Well, he left us out here all by ourselves. I'm going home too. Right? All those things, it's problem solving. And that's part of what you got to do to keep the ball rolling. All right, let me talk about praise. So in 52 days, they built the walls of Jerusalem. Walls been down for 80, 90 years. I don't even know. I mean, if you think about the 70 years they were out, and then however many decades it was that they were back, and the walls were down all that time, and in 52 days, they had the walls back up. That's unbelievable. So what do? Well, I like this quote. The last step of any significant enterprise is to celebrate. You know, people, there's just no other way to say it, right? This is often overlooked, right? It's like moving on to the next project. Let's go do this now. You got to take a moment and say, hey, let's celebrate. This was a major accomplishment. This was huge. We have rebuilt the walls of the Lord's city, right? Jerusalem is that much closer to what it used to be now. Let's recognize and celebrate all of that. And, you know, not everything is going to be a huge party, but acknowledgement and recognition when things are accomplished is a really important part of any encouragement process, right? Now go all the way back to when we talked about the attitude of an encourager, like 6 weeks ago. This is something we talked about, right? You don't let perfection impede your ability to recognize progress, right? If you're working with somebody, you're trying to build them up, you're trying to encourage them, you know, and let's say you're encouraging me to lose 30 pounds, right? And I lose 10. You know what? 10's pretty good, Doug. How about encouraging that? Celebrate that. You know what? You got 10 down. You didn't get 30, but you could. You still could do this, you know. I may never get to 30, but recognize the incremental victories, right? Did I deliver 3 invitations this week? No, but I talked to one guy, and we talked about Jesus. You know what? That's great. That's a great first start. This week, let's try to talk to a couple of people about Jesus, you know? All of these things are praiseworthy, and we should be the praise-givenest people that we can be, you know, to people who are accomplishing these tasks and showing these incremental improvements. I am confident that during the 52 days, as Nehemiah is going from place to place, and he's watching these guys with a sword in one hand and putting rocks on the wall with the other, you know, I'm sure he's saying, keep it up, you're doing great, it looks good, you guys are doing really well, right? I'm sure there was incremental acknowledgement and encouragement going on to that. But at the end, there was celebration because of what they were able to accomplish, and everybody felt a part of it. And that's really what is something we need to grab a hold of. So, in short, there were 10 steps that we just kind of talked through. So I'm not going to talk through them all again in detail. But the idea, if you're going to encourage a group in a spiritual endeavor, right, number one, guess what? We lean on God. Because without that, none of this really matters, right? If we're not doing God's work, if we're not relying on God, you know, what is it? Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it, right? Got to be leaning on God. You kind of identify your needs, right? And make your plan. What is it you want to do? And then you articulate the vision. You say, this is the idea, this is how we're going to do it. Then you hand it out and you organize it. You expect criticism. You resist distraction. You follow through and you celebrate. There's a bunch of people in this room who are working really hard on VBS. They're either teaching, they're cutting out stuff, they're prepping decorations, they're getting ready to, once that's all done, pack it all up and take it to Dominica and do it there, right? That doesn't just happen. All of that requires all of this, right? And so as you drive through it, you know, it could be an annual project like a VBS. It could be an ongoing project like some of the groups that we have go on here. It might be one of Charlie's good ideas that the elders have that we're looking for someone to grab it and run with it. But all of those things come together when we kind of follow the model of Nehemiah, if you want to think about it that way. Thoughts, comments, questions? Ignore that.
In a lot of organizations, the church is no different. If when criticism comes up, give me a suggestion about how to fix it. Don't just criticize it because you just don't like the idea or you don't like what the group is doing. How do I fix it? You give me a suggestion when we can make it better.
Yeah, Charlie said, when criticism comes up, one of the things you need to do is say, well, what's your suggestion on how to fix that, right? Which really does two things. One, it validates the person who's making the criticism, right? It says, I'm listening to you. I understand your criticism. I'm now soliciting your feedback about how to fix that. Oh, you don't have an idea. Okay, I will still think about it. Maybe I will course correct, but at least so I've done a couple of things just by asking that question. And oh, by the way, if they weren't really serious, it kind of melts away then. So, yes, ma'am.
We were talking about the encouraging, I don't know if it really covered the teenagers and the young people and the college kids that come back and that's the people that are leading the church.
That's a great point. The conversation here is about other groups we need to encourage, teenagers, young people, people who are, they get to college or they get out of college and then they kind of leave. They kind of walk away from the faith. And it's a terrible, it's a hurtful thing to see it happen, and one thing that can help, that can matter, is be an encourager to those groups. There are people here that are trying to get those people together, kind of build bonds among them and that kind of stuff. And that's all important, and it can only help as we try to kind of avoid that. So thank you for that. All right, I think we're going to be done for now. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you guys next.